Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to my second attempt at doing an Alhaitham pre-release. Here's the thing. I recorded a pre-release, then he got a bunch of nerfs, and then I recorded well, I didn't really record, but I talked about them a lot, intending on, like, sending a bunch of clips for my editor to like, change it, and then he got a bunch of buffs. And now I'm just like, okay, you know what, f*** it, I'll just do it again. So this is attempt number 2, and I'm a little bit frustrated, so that might show through my tone. Anyways, base HP 13k, base defense 782. This is like basically what you'd expect out of a 5-star melee character. So a bit on the tankier side, but not by that much. And then base attack 313, a decent amount. Dendro damage ascension. He's got his normal attacks, very cool. His E rushes forward, dealing Dendro damage to nearby opponent when the rush ends, causing a chisel light mirror to form. Holding the skill will cause it to behave differently, and if you hold it, you can aim it. It generates a mirror, and anytime you have mirrors active, you will get a Dendro infusion on your normal attacks, and when you do normal attacks, you will get your E to do like a projection attack, whatever. He can have up to 3 mirrors from a bunch of different sources that we'll talk about later, and the more mirrors he has, the more damage his projection attack does. And that's actually one of the things that changed a lot with the nerfs and then the buffs. Now, it's the same number for all 3, except you just get 2 and then 3 of them. It used to be that it was a good number here, and then a slightly smaller number, but times 2, that ended up being a little bit bigger overall, and then same thing for this, but times 3. They changed it, so now it's just the same for all 3, which kind of just pushes him more towards really wanting to have all 3. And it makes it clear that getting all 3 is better than getting only a certain amount. When you use his E while you have no mirrors, you gain 2 mirrors. Otherwise, you'll gain 1. He also has an Ascension passive that lets him generate a mirror. When he does a charger up lunge attack, he will generate a mirror up to once every 12 seconds. Let's now look at his burst. Creates a particular binding field and deals multiple instances of AoE Dendro damage. If any mirrors exist, they will all be consumed and increase the number of damage instances dealt. So, if you had no mirrors, it does the damage 4 times. If you had 1 mirror, it does it 6 times. 2 mirrors, 8 times. 3 mirrors, 10 times. And then after 2 seconds, you will generate, 3 minus the number of mirrors you consumed. Which means if you had 0, you'll generate 3. If you had 3, you'll generate 0. And if you had 2, you'll generate 1. The way that this is basically going to end up working out is you want to be at 3 mirrors as much as possible. And so what you're generally going to end up doing is you're going to open up with your burst, get your shit going, and then once you get in the stocks, you just start attacking and eventually gaining the rest of your stocks to keep the duration of having 3 mirrors as high as possible. So the way that the mirror duration lasts is they last 4 seconds, but only one duration ticks down at a time, which means if you're at 3 mirror, after 4 seconds, you're going to be at 2 mirrors, and then after another 4 seconds, you're going to be at 1 mirror, and then after another 4 seconds, you'll lose that. Once you lose your 3 mirrors, you can either keep going when you, like, with 2 mirrors. I don't expect that to be what you want to do. I expect it to be more, like, focused on, like, as soon as you don't have 3 mirrors anymore, you swap out. Before we get into, like, talking about the numbers too much, let's talk about the internal cooldown. So his E has a special internal cooldown where he effectively doesn't have a time rule. He has a 12-second time rule, but 12 seconds is so long that it effectively doesn't really matter. But his hit rule is 2 hits rather than 3. So for those of you who aren't familiar with internal cooldown, there's a time rule and a hit rule, and they can work at the same time and shit. But the simple explanation for it is basically just with the hit rule of 2 and a long time rule, every other hit of his elemental skill will apply the element. But that means that when he has 3 mirrors, he can get 2 applications in 1 projection. That's part of the reason why having 3 mirrors is just so much better, is because it makes you go from having 1 Dendro application on your waves to having 1.5 average, right? Because you get on hit 1, 3, and then 5. So since you're hitting in waves of 3, the first wave is going to have hits 1 and 3, so it's going to apply Dendro twice, which means 2 spreads if you have Quicken on the enemy. On top of the fact that you just get like 50% more damage than the level 2, and 3 times the damage of the level 1, right? All in all, being on 3 mirrors boosts his damage a lot. So what we're gonna do is we're basically just gonna go through his numbers and try to look at a few other units and kind of look at basically the kind of stuff you can expect out of it. I think that the easiest thing is gonna be to start by looking at Nahida, because Nahida also has a dual scaling. So if both of them are at talent level 9, his initial hit is less EM scaling, more attack scaling. Overall, somewhat similar-ish scaling to Nahida's E when it procs, not the cast. And then the mirror projection, 1 mirror projection would be the equivalent of basically 2/3 of Nahida proc, but 3 would be the equivalent of 2 Nahida procs, right? However, unlike Nahida, he needs to be on field to do them, right? Which is the biggest difference between them, is that Alhaitham basically doesn't really have any off-field presence. Technically, if you have like a lot of mirrors in your burst, it's gonna last 3 seconds or some shit. I don't know exactly, but it's not a real off-field, right? Like you get what I'm saying when I say that he doesn't have real off-field. But yeah, if we start looking into the numbers a bit more, because he has so many different things that hit, and because all of those different things have a bunch of different scalings, so it takes 2 seconds to get the mirrors from his burst, and because you want to get those mirrors like while you're at 0 mirrors, right? Like you want to use your burst at 0 mirrors if you're gonna on-field him. That basically makes it so that you have like 2 seconds where you're either gonna do physical normal attacks or swap out of him and then try to come back to him before the 2 seconds expire, which can be a little bit risky, especially if you have a high ping. So you might have physical and elemental normal attacks, and on top of that, you're gonna have some charge attacks. You're gonna have E scaling with EM, E scaling with attack, Q scaling with EM, Q scaling with attack, and then a bunch of spreads on all of your different sources of damage, which makes it so that he gets a lot of different sources of damage, which makes it a little bit hard to visualize how much damage he actually does if you're not cheating it properly. Also, I will be right back. Sorry. That was like a small rundown. His normal attack scalings aren't that good. They used to be pretty decent, but they kind of nerfed them to shit. The EM scaling on his E is actually very good. He used to have a significantly higher EM scaling on the initial cast, but I guess they just didn't want people to use him as a quick swap unit. So they shifted some of his power from the front loaded to the sustained. Same thing for his burst. With the current version of him, I'd say that you almost always are gonna build him like this. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is his second ascension passive, which is the thing that was mistranslated. So this one isn't updated, but this should be 0.1% and up to 100%. The thing about this is this passive, coupled with the fact that he has directly EM scaling in his kit, makes EM more valuable than it usually is. A lot like in Nahida's case. However, unlike Nahida, like his EM to useful stats conversion isn't as good, and he also has arguably slightly bigger portion of his damage that's done through attack scaling, which means that whereas for Nahida you would generally want to go sometimes double or even triple EM, in Alhaitham's case that's generally not going to be ideal. So if we're assuming basically 100% quicken up time, so the difference between just normal stuff and, well, let's say you get an EM goblet, right? It's 5 to like 8-9% worse. And then with an EM circlet instead of crit, 5 to 8-9% worse. So generally you're still gonna want damage and crit on your circlet and goblet, unlike some situations with Nahida. A pretty important thing nonetheless is, yeah, sure, like it's not as good, but it still is good. EM is still good for him, which means that weapons that give him EM are also very good for him. Okay. Combos. It kind of doesn't matter what combos you do. His normal attacks basically just suck, and so do his charge attacks. Most of his damage is coming from his E, like, projection attacks. So just do whatever when it comes to, like, your normal attack combos. Now, when it comes to, like, rotations, you generally are gonna wanna, set up some stuff. Use your burst, and then if you have low enough ping, you can swap out and then use, like, either Dendro main character skill or anything else, really, and then swap back into him before 2 seconds. And that basically lets you do something instead of just doing physical normal attacks for 2 seconds. Because he does get like he does get his mirrors only 2 seconds after using the burst. After that, you basically just attack, and after a bit less than 4 seconds, you use your charge attack or your E. And then after another a bit less than 4 seconds, you use the other one, and that gets you another 4 seconds of 3 mirrors. Yeah. Then you look at his constellations. Effectively what this does is not that much. You'll get 6 of them basically, but like 2 of them are gonna happen before you use your E at all, so it doesn't do that much. So you effectively only really get 4 projection attacks at 3 mirrors, which makes your E cooldown go from 18 to like, what would it be, like 13? Which is still not enough to get a second E while still being at 3 mirrors. It's not ideal. It can make it a little bit easier to get through his rotations, but it really doesn't do much by itself. It does have synergy with some future constellations though. C2, he gains EM when generating a mirror, and he can get that up to 4 times. And so it's basically 200 EM, which is good. Not game breaking, but pretty good. C3 is okay. C4, when you burst, every mirror you generate gives you 10% damage bonus. You generally burst with 0 mirrors, so you'll generate 3, which is 30% damage bonus, which is pretty good. C5 is pretty bad now that they've nerfed the burst, but it's still like fine. And then finally, C6, he will generate 3 mirrors no matter what when using his burst, instead of only like generating mirrors based on how many mirrors he had, which lets you basically get 3 mirrors, then use your burst, and you get like the burst with all 10 hits, and you still generate 3 mirrors. And then he can pretty easily get this and get a bunch of crit rate and crit damage. Obviously, as usual, Constellations are never fucking worth it. It doesn't really change his gameplay that much. With CCX, his combos change a little bit, but yeah. The weapons he wants to go for will depend on what team he's on. If he's in a team where he doesn't really get any spreads, right? So if you're looking at, for example, Hyper Bloom teams with slow Electro, so double Hydro, just like the Nahida Hyper Bloom with double Hydro team, those would be the kind of teams where he doesn't get that much value out of Elemental Mastery, which makes any attack-based weapon be less bad than they usually are. But for this weapon comparison, I'll be looking at Quicken and Quick Bloom teams. His best in slot, obviously, is his signature. Key is like something that you can go for if the rest of your team has also a lot of damage percent, a lot of crit, because the EM buff on them can end up being significant. Otherwise, it's generally not something I would be focusing on too much. It's kind of just like, honestly, to the point where I'm probably not even going to include it. Haran is kind of just like, okay, 5-star. And the state of his weapons is basically, you've got his best in slot, then you've got the okay 5 stars, then you've got his free-to-play options, and that's kind of it. Mistsplitter is also an okay 5-star, but it's better than a Haran, so it's like, good. Same for the Jade Cutter. Summon Shaper, bait. Summon Shaper can be fine if you're playing him in a Hyper Bloom team where he doesn't get good quick enough time, but otherwise, I wouldn't recommend it. Freedom Sorin is actually surprisingly okay because the EM is good on him, and so it's not a wasted stat, so it's just fine. It's kind of just like one of the okay 5-star options you can have. Umbrella, right, the new free-to-play weapon from the event, is actually his best free-to-play weapon. And because there's so many different things that can change weapon rankings, this isn't always going to be the case, but when it comes to the assumptions that I used in Quicken, it's only about 20% behind his signature weapon. And it's not that far behind the okay or good 5-star weapons. Now, obviously, I'm sure you see the Harbinger right here, which is obviously, when you can have it, oh boy. Like, when the passive is up, woo! Harbinger is a fucking broken weapon on split scaling characters like Alhaitham that have both an attack and an EM scaling because, well, fuck attack and EM, I'm just gonna give you so much crit and it works on both, so like, yeah, that's sick. But it's hard to maintain that at above 90%, so it's best situational free-to-play weapon. Xiphos, now, as you can see here, I didn't actually take ER requirements into account in this specific sheet, but we'll talk about his ER requirements. I guess we should do that now. He is reliant on his burst. Even though his burst doesn't do that much damage, without his burst, he can only have effectively basically 4 seconds of uptime. With his burst, he can extend that to like 12-ish seconds, which is a massive difference. Which means that in a lot of teams, you're gonna want to end up running him with another Dendro unit, because he's just significantly less strong if you don't. And unsurprisingly, the best off-field battery Dendro unit is Nahida. The more your team is suited to like fix his potential energy issues, the less good ER weapons will be. But the more ER you need, the better stuff like Xiphos will be. Because obviously you want to get a decent amount of EM, and you need the ER. And it's also going to help the ER of the rest of your characters. Let's look at his energy. So from himself, he'll generate 6 energy. And then if you're using Nahida, you can potentially get another 6. Then let's say we go right in Yelan, right? He has a 70 burst cost and around 124 in this situation. Nahida particle generation doesn't line up always with your stuff properly, so sometimes there'll be more. And most importantly, if you don't get Nahida, right, if you're on fucking Dendro main character instead, your requirements start going up like pretty significantly. And so because of that, it's hard to give like a confident statement on how good weapons that have ER are. Very good if you need ER. Sapwood, okay if you need ER. Black Sword. Here's the thing about Black Sword. Both the nerfs and the buffs that he got, they both actually nerfed his normal attacks. Which means that his normal attacks are a lot worse than they were when I recorded the first pre-release, which is going to make Black Sword a lot worse as well. You also kind of want to do some charge attacks sometimes, and Black Sword doesn't buff those, which makes it so Black Sword is kind of just like meh. Generally, it's not even gonna outdamage the free-to-play options, even at high refine. Kind of a similar thing for Blackcliff, where obviously Blackcliff, if you have a lot of stacks on it, can be pretty good, but at a baseline, it's not the best. Iron Sting is baseline free-to-play. Umbrella is generally going to be better than Iron Sting, but the Umbrella's passive, it will inflict an instance upon one of them. And yeah, you can get it R5, that's cool, but that's the point, right? It's only one of them. So you only get the increased, like 32% damage against one of the enemies you're fighting. So in AoE, it becomes less good. On top of that, it's an event weapon, which means that knowing that Iron Sting is only like 3-ish% behind the Umbrella, closer to 8-ish% if it's a lower fine Iron Sting. But knowing that it's not too far behind at R5 means that if you're in AoE, or if you just didn't get the Umbrella because you weren't playing when the event was happening, you can still get away with Iron Sting without worrying too much. Lion's Roar is a fucking joke on him. I've already talked a little bit about his internal cooldown and how when you have 3 mirrors, which is what you want, you'll apply Dendro twice in a row sometimes because you'll get it on hit 1 and on hit 3. Well, that's gonna wipe any fucking Electro Aura that you could have on an enemy. Which means, unless you're playing him in Burning, in which case, like, bless your soul, I guess. Lion's Roar is gonna have really shitty uptime on its passive. And then on top of that, because his energy requirements are pretty high and you generally want to play him with another Dendro unit, that makes it even harder to maintain an Electro Aura. Which means that Lion's Roar is unironically big ass fucking bait. Do not go Lion's Roar. Sapwood is okay if you need ER, but if you really need the ER, at that point just go Fab. So fuck Sapwood. And honestly, fuck Black Sword as well. Fuck Blackcliff. I guess apart from Fav, which I'm not going to include because it's very, like, situational for him because he is a damage dealer. Ah, shit, right. Festering. Festering can be fine if you need a lot of ER. And, right, as usual, I'm not gonna rank them, like, from best to worst, like, strictly because, again, right, a lot of these rankings are going to shift around depending on what team you're playing. Light is obviously his best in slot. If you don't have it, Jake Cutter and Mist Splitter are generally going to be your best choices. Now, generally, Jake Cutter is going to be a teeny tiny bit ahead, but obviously, again, depends on what teams you end up playing. Haran and Freedom Sworn. I'm not going to put Harbinger. Harbinger would, like, if I just follow the ranking strictly, right? Harbinger would be in between Haran and Freedom Sworn, but because it's like you need a requirement for it, I think I'll just put it a little bit lower down. I'd say that if you have all of these weapons, I'd probably go Xiphos over the others, then probably Umbrella, then probably Iron Sting, then Harbinger, then Festering. But again, right, very, very dependent on what team you end up playing, what units you end up playing. Next up, artifact sets. We've talked a little bit how his set of buffs and nerfs basically just good at his normal attacks. Normal attack sets were not very good to begin with, but now they're basically just complete garbage, which basically leaves you with a few options. You have energy requirements, which means that by design, if we start talking about 2-piece sets, then Emblem will be a fine set to consider. And outside of that, he's a Dendro character, which means that he really, really wants either to be on Deepwood or to have someone else on the team on Deepwood. However, just like I said, I do expect him to be more of a double Dendro unit than a solo Dendro unit. And most of the time, you'd be better off having Deepwood on your support, right? Either your Nahida or your Dendro main character, and then having him on a more offensive set. Deepwood, good if solo Dendro. Other than that, I would almost always recommend either 4-piece Gilded or 2-piece of EM/Dendro%/ER, depending on what you need. Just keep in mind, right, 4-piece Gilded is generally gonna be, I mean, it's gonna be what you see the highest numbers on, but if you have better stats on a 2-piece, it's not far enough above the other options to justify ignoring the other options altogether. It's not like Crimson Witch on Diluc. It's not like Blizzard Strayer on Freeze carries. Anyways, just keep an open mind for 2-piece sets, especially, and most importantly, if you don't get enough ER, which if you don't use Nahida, is very possible. Artifact stats, EM, damage percent, crit, general, best in slot. However, and again, right, I cannot stress this enough, this is also going to be fine, especially if you end up running him in solo Dendro. So if we look at, for example, double Hydro Hyper Bloom team that a lot of people play with either Kuki or Raiden, let's even use Raiden to give him a chance because Raiden generates more energy with her E than Kuki does. So he can generate basically 6 particles. Raiden's going to give him about 6 as well. And then 4 from off field, and then Yelan, and then Sing 2. You don't really want to have to play Fav Syncto if you're doing double Hydro, but you're kinda gonna have to. Even then, right? You look at this, these energy requirements are pretty fucking high. And definitely high enough to potentially justify an ER sense. Which is unfortunate, but another possible solution is to just use Fav. If you were to use Fav, then his energy requirements would be basically what Fav gives you, and you basically wouldn't have any energy requirements. And you generate energy for the rest of your team. My point with this is basically, if you play him in solo Dendro teams, his energy requirements can very much be high enough to justify needing an ER sense. And his damage at 2 and 1 mirrors is shit enough that it is worth getting your burst so you can maintain 3 mirrors for 12 seconds rather than 4 seconds of 3, then 4 seconds of 2, then 4 seconds of 1, right? However, and this is pretty important too, this assumes that like baseline, okay, use back-to-back rotations, and obviously the higher investment you are, the less that becomes necessary because you kind of start having enough damage to one-rotate the enemies. If we look at another team where you could play him double Dendro Hyperbloom, right? These are just the 2 I'll do for now, right? So I'll just update this. So it's about 124-ish. That's assuming you're not on Fav Nahida. I personally really like Fav Nahida, so if you are on Fav Nahida, it's even lower. I just really want to stress that he is a unit that relies on his burst. His burst is effectively what lets him stay on 3 mirrors for a long time. Without his burst, he basically can't do that. So he basically needs his burst to be a good on-fielder, which can make him energy hungry if you're not playing him with a unit that generates a lot of particles for him. Finally, teams. And I guess here's where we should talk about his strength. When the initial nerfs came, I talked about them, and my words were unfortunately taken out of context by a bunch of people, which occupational hazard, I guess, but still kind of sucks. Anyways, I was asked like whether or not he's still good, whether he can be a unit that's worth rolling for, whether he's just gonna be like a complete garbage thing that's a waste of primo gems if you don't just like his personality, whatever, right? And the thing about him is that he's Dendro. And I haven't talked about it too much on the YouTube yet, but Dendro as an element very much shook the way that you can really think about your units, in the sense that Hyperbloom's base damage is, honestly, you could argue too high. To the point where any units that can function in Hyperbloom teams, and even in some of the other non-Hyperbloom Dendro teams, like Virgin and shit, have their, like, performance at low investment and or without whaling raised pretty significantly. Because A, most of the units that rely on those reactions don't gain additional application from getting higher constellations, and B, getting your EM to a reasonable number is actually pretty short, like time-wise, resin investment-wise, and then getting that number to like, wow, best artifact you've ever seen isn't doubling your DPS. It's increasing your DPS by like 15% maybe, right? So you get significantly closer to that ceiling with a relatively low amount of time investment. The thing is, because that ceiling is like basically balanced to be in check with the ceiling of other shit and not really lower, then that makes it so that unless you're a whale or you're a fucking day one player that's been working on one team since 1.0, it's pretty likely that the Hyperbloom teams you can make will just clear faster than the non-Hyperbloom teams, right? The transformative Dendro teams just have such a high floor. Now, the thing about that is they have that high floor with Dendro NC. They have that high floor with Cole. And yeah, Cole's a fucking pain in the ass to play because burst auto-targeting has the same problem as Diona, where like it doesn't arc like this. So if the enemies are like slightly up in the air when you cast it and then they go down, well, it's just gonna go over them and it'll fucking go to Narnia. And then her E has the weirdest fucking like thin ass hitbox and like goes like this and just goes around the enemy half the time and just doesn't hit them. But if you're willing to work with that frustration, even Cole has like good teams that revolve around her being the Dendro unit for the team. But that kind of puts you in a situation where you already have 2 Dendro units. You have Dendro main character and you have Cole. And they're part of good teams. And you can go for Dendro characters that can replace or work with them, and those will also be good teams. The question then becomes, is it worth your primo gems to go for that unit that is better, but you already have a good team? Or would you rather keep your primo gems for something that is different? And that's kind of what Alhaitham ends up coming down to. Is he a good unit, like, in general? Like, is he strong? Yes, because he's a Dendro on-fielder with decent numbers. And because of that, it means that, fuck, you just from being a Dendro on-fielder, you can put him on Fab with fucking defense percent artifacts, and just from being a Dendro on-fielder, he can be the driver for a Hyperbloom team that can clear 36 star with no fucking problem. Or you can build him kind of like he's supposed to be and have him be a spread carry. Because that floor is so high, and because the amount of investment that's required to basically reach 36 star if you play your teams well with those Dendro teams is so low, then that means that if you're looking at these units at floor level, then it means that, well, yeah, Alhaitham is one of the best units to go for. Probably not better than the like good supports, but if you're comparing him to carries, he's probably gonna be better because he's part of Dendro teams, and Dendro teams floor is so high that yeah, like you could probably 36 star an Abyss from a new account in like a month and a half with him. Anyways, the thing is, A, not everyone plays perfectly, which means that being able to get to that floor isn't always enough. B, people often like playing different things and can get bored of just playing the same thing over and over again. And C, the more investment you put on your characters, and also the more you wail on your characters, the closer you get to the ceiling, and the less it matters that you have a high floor. Now, I focus my theory crafting mostly on the floor because it's my opinion that the only real challenge that the game actually gives you itself is 36 starring Abyss, and any other things you might want to do are going to have to be self-imposed challenges because the game isn't giving you anything. We don't have endgame content, we don't have anything to work towards. And when it comes to self-imposed challenge, there's going to be too much variance in that for me to be able to be okay, well, I can't give good recommendations for your self-imposed challenges because I don't know what your challenge is. And so that kind of forces me to really evaluate units when I try to give advice with the criteria that I know that everyone will have at some point, which is 36 starring Abyss. And because of that, I focus most of my theory crafting on floor level and basically just getting your 36 star. Because once you've got your 36 star, you got your 36 star, you don't have the wall in front of you that you have to go over, and you can decide what you want to do. Do you want to play Xinyan because she's your favorite unit? Do you want to keep building your strong team even stronger? All that, whatever. It's your choice, and no matter what you do, the game won't punish you because there's no content that will. All of this to say, with the criteria that I use, Alhaitham is one of the better units. But the criteria that I use are inherently flawed because there's no perfect set of criteria, because by definition, from the game's lack of a real endgame, the end goal of each account will be different. It's subjective. With that out of the way, the two main ways that you'll have to use him is either as a kind of solo Dendro on-fielder, kind of just like a budget Nahida, which if you don't have Nahida, is probably going to be an upgrade over your other Dendro options. And the second way you can use him is with Nahida, or with another Dendro unit in Spread or Quick Bloom or Quicken Teams. When it comes to just replacing Nahida, basically, he's gonna be kind of an inferior version of Nahida because, well, his energy requirements are stricter, he doesn't have any real off-field presence, and his damage while on-field isn't good enough to justify how much you have to sacrifice replacing Nahida for him. But if you don't have Nahida, well, you're not comparing him to Nahida, you're comparing him to Dendro main character, and if your team allows for having an on-field driver, he's probably gonna be better. And he's actually pretty good. And yeah, if you do have Nahida and you use her on one team, you can still use him on the other team and basically end up with two quote-unquote Nahidas, but obviously it would be a downgrade over Nahida. If you end up using him with Nahida, it's kind of just another one of Nahida's good teams, where you don't need him for Nahida to have good teams, but his teams with Nahida are good. And that's kind of what it boils down to. And that's why he's basically a unit that's both pretty strong, but also very skippable. You're not gonna regret skipping him because he doesn't provide anything special that you need if you end up skipping him for meta related reasons. But also, if either the playstyle is something you're interested in or you like the character, you're not gonna regret pulling for him because he's pretty good. And he's really the epitome of do what the fuck you want. Anyways, let's get more specifically into the teams. So you're gonna have double Dendro, Quick Bloom / Hyper Bloom, which is generally probably gonna be his best team with Nahida. No, his only good team, and obviously the floor for Quick Bloom is a little bit lower than the floor for just pure Hyper Bloom because more of your damage is tied to your character's crit and damage percent and just overall stats, rather than most of it being from the reaction itself. Then you have, I guess, double Hydro Hyper Bloom, which is gonna be good, but he's kind of a downgrade over Nahida. double Electro. It's kind of quick bloom, also good. And so I guess it's another example, another possible Rhino driver. You can play him with Veil, right? And then it really ends up being all quick and stuff. You can't really do double Dendro Burgeon because you're not gonna get any versions. And then Bloom, he works, but he won't be your best option. No real reason to play him over Nahida. Anyways, he's kind of just solid overall unit. But yeah, so that basically does it. This isn't like the full extent of teams you can potentially play him in as a Dendro unit. You can kind of just do whatever because Dendro has a lot of weird ass fucking teams you can do. But I think it covers the main ones. All in all, he's gonna be solid. Just pretty cool unit overall. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitch, all that. And I'll see you guys around. Bye, YouTube. I really fucking hope he doesn't get changed again next week because I'm not doing this again.